In this video, we're going to learn about two different triangles. The first triangle is the influence triangle, and I will pop a graphic up on the screen right here so you can see the influence triangle. I'm not really sure why they used a triangle in order to do the influence triangle. They could have used some other shape to convey the same information, but the creators of the influence triangle must have had a thing for triangles. Now, the primary source that I'm using for this content is Agricultural Policy in the United States, this textbook right here. Perfectly fine textbook. Definitely recommend picking that up. This textbook doesn't really spend a lot of time on this triangle. They don't even call it the triangle. They call it, they have a subsection on page 40 called Kings and Kingmakers. And so they're looking at a model of kings and kingmakers. But I like the influence triangle model better because it has a graphic, and the graphics sometimes just make it easier to convey information. And let me throw the graphic up here real quick, and I want to call your attention to the bottom. The very bottom is what we call the apathetic group. These are the individuals that are not interested in policy. They're not going to try to influence policy. They probably don't even vote. They're not going to stay informed, and they are just generally apathetic. And I'm not trying to be judgmental to the apathetic group. Feel free to not vote if you don't want to vote. Doesn't matter to me if you inform yourself on political issues. Do what you want with your time and money and energy. A lot of times these are people who are just busy going about their own personal lives and don't really have time to worry about, which candidate should I vote for or what's going on locally in the political scene. And so the apathetic group, oftentimes they can be very cynical. They're people who aren't involved and not plugged in. They're not going to vote, right? Now, climbing the ladder up, you have the interested group. Now, people in the interested group are probably going to vote. But they're not going to be campaigning for somebody. Someone in the interested group might put a yard sign in their yard, but probably not. These individuals tend to inform themselves and, jump on the internet and watch the news and are aware of issues and will take action by voting, but won't engage in the political process anymore. Next up is the active group. Now, these are the individuals that are going to be actively campaigning for ideas or candidates. Not only do they have a yard sign in their yard, they're also asking you to put a yard sign in your yard, which you may or may not like. These are the people who are out there volunteering for campaigns and donating to charities and involved in their community. These are, this is your scoutmaster if you're in the scouts. This is the leadership in the local community, people who want to be involved and see themselves as movers and shakers. And this is important because they see themselves as movers and shakers. And they're influential because they influence the interested group. And the active group and the interested group are the bulk of the voters. They vote and they have influence on the apathetic group. Because the apathetic group, they don't vote, so they don't have a say in the political process, and a lot happens to them that they didn't have any control over because they were apathetic. So that's the active group. Now, the next notch up is the king. And I don't particularly like calling them the kings. These are the people who are actually running for office. These are the people who are sitting on the city council. These are the people who are at the state legislature or the federal legislature or sitting in the White House, or maybe they're a judge or something like that. And the thing to remember about this particular influence diagram is that the kings are not at the top of the diagram. There is still yet a smaller group in this kind of reverse funnel that's above the kings. And that is the king makers. The king makers are the real movers and the shakers. You typically do not have any idea who the king makers are. These are powerful individuals that oftentimes are funding campaigns and have influence on the people who actually create the laws, pass the laws, and make the laws happen, right? Actually carry out the legal system and the policy system in this country. Or any country. The thing I don't like about this model of influence is it leads to people to kind of conclude these weird conspiracy theories that there's this cabal of wealthy elites that are actually running the country, and all of the legislators are just puppets on a string being manipulated by these hidden kingmakers. Like like the Masons or something like that. I don't really think that's the way to approach it. The better way to approach it is to understand that there are a group of people that are very forward thinking and looking out into the future as to what's going to happen in the legislature. And they ultimately don't care if Republicans or Democrats win. They just want to make sure they know what's going to happen so they can stay out in front of it and benefit from it. So that's the influence triangle. It starts off with kingmakers, and then kings, then the active group, then the interested group, and finally the apathetic group. Now, the next triangle that I want to talk about is the iron triangle. And this one right here is a little bit more, I think, relevant for what we do in the classes that I teach. So I'll see if I can get a picture of the iron triangle up just for your information, but I'll stick it up on the screen there. We got the iron triangle. The logic behind the iron triangle is simple, is there are 3 points on this triangle. You've got Congress on one end, you've got the administration on the other, and you have lobbyists on the third. Now, if you know anything at all about civics, you would think, well, shouldn't this be like legislative, executive, and judicial? Well, this is a little bit different kind of setup. This is a way of kind of explaining how things are influenced. And so the way to think about this is you have Congress, and Congress is the one that makes laws, right? That's the job of Congress, is to make laws. The executive branch can then sign bills into laws or veto them. And the most important part about what the executive branch does is it's the administrative branch. It is the branch that carries out the laws. And that is very important for a lot of very important reasons. The most important reason, the way we set up our administrative law. There's actually a thing called administrative law. There are judges called administrative law judges. So what tends to happen is that Congress will pass a law. In the process of passing that law, will hand the authority for executing that law to an administrative branch, such as the Environmental Protection Agency, the United States Department of Agriculture, the Food and Drug Administration. And what ends up happening is that the various administrative branches of the federal government have the ability to act as if they've got the full force of law behind them. They can create rules and regulations that are laws, that are as powerful as laws, because Congress says to them, I'm giving you the authority to take a law and implement it. And their implementation of the law is in essence what the law is. Let me give you a tangible example of what I'm talking about. There is a little line in the Farm Bill, in the environmental section of the Farm Bill, called the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, also known as EQIP. And the way Congress worded this in the Farm Bill and was signed into law, EQIP is a little bit on the vague side. EQIP basically is this list of things that the USDA can spend money on. That's what it is. And these are items that are designed to improve the environment. So it's a list of environmental quality improvement programs that the USDA can take their funding and kind of have some play to do with it. And there's some advantages to that, because that way the USDA can react to the situation on the ground. There are some disadvantages to that, because that means that the lobbyists could interact with the USDA and attempt to create something the lobbyists want, which sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. Lobbyists aren't inherently evil, because oftentimes lobbyists speak for us as individuals, or at least the groups that we're a part of. And that's why we have Congress, the legislative branch, and then we have the administrative side of our federal government and lobbyists tied together. So you've got these 3 things that lead to how policy is implemented. Now back to the EQIP program. A couple of years ago, the hot thing that popped up in the EQIP program was cover crops. The USDA decided that it wanted to take the EQIP funding that they had and use it to subsidize the planting of cover crops. And planting cover crops is a great idea. It's really good for the soil. It prevents soil erosion. The green matter that you grow gets turned into, in essence, fertilizer at the end of the year when you turn under and plant your crop. But farmers tend not to plant cover crops because there's no profit in planting a cover crop. You'll never get your money back from planting that cover crop, or at least it doesn't appear that you will. You might improve your soil enough to get yield increases in the future and make the money back, but it's going to take a little while to build up your topsoil with the cover crop. Cover crops are great. It's a really good practice. Farmers should be planting cover crops. And the USDA realized this and decided, well, if we throw some money at them, we might be able to incentivize farmers to plant cover crops. And it turned into a really big thing. The Tennessee Farmers Cooperative, for example, built a whole new facility just to bag up seed for cover crops. If you're not familiar with the Tennessee Farmers Cooperative, it's one of the largest agricultural suppliers in the entire nation. And had the EQIP program not had the flexibility to throw money into cover crops, you would have had to have gone back to Congress in order to get that policy put in place. So it's really important to kind of understand that Congress just kind of put this framework out there that the USDA took and then implemented. And the implementation has the full force of law because Congress ceded that authority to the USDA, which, good or bad or indifferent, that's kind of how it works. The EPA is the exact same way. Congress gives a task to the EPA associated with clean air and clean water, and the EPA then takes that task and interprets the way the EPA wants to implement it. Same thing goes with the FDA. The Food and Drug Administration is tasked with ensuring that foods and drugs are safe. And the FDA gets to decide how they do it because the law that created the FDA built that flexibility into the FDA. And so that is a quick discussion about two triangles.